Welcome, my sisters and brothers, to this, the homily for Holy Family Sunday. And mysteriously, we've jumped 12 years between yesterday, Jesus' birth, and today, his being taken up to the temple for this feast of the Passover, aged 12. And this is because, obviously, we're here celebrating the sense of his family. So, St. Luke gives us this, the only account we have of anything in between Jesus' complete infancy and the beginning of his ministry, is this little scene in the temple. And of course, Luke, being a genius, stuffs it absolutely full of little hints of what's going on here. First of all, one of the background texts to these scenes from Jesus' infancy is the scene from Hannah, the mother of Samuel, which we have in our first reading. Samuel was traditionally held to have been 12 years old when he heard the voice in the temple. But Hannah, whose song, when she's told that she's going to bring forth a son, is very similar to Mary's Magnificat, she takes her child to the temple. And of course, the child is received. It's not known at the time by Eli the priest and those who are there that in fact he is going to replace them, that Eli and his family are going to be rejected. So here we have the new Samuel, if you like, but here is the definitive great high priest, the one who's actually going to bring to an end the whole of the temple. And we know that this is being hinted at here because the very last phrase of our gospel today is, this is after Jesus has gone back home with his mum and dad. He said, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favour," which is almost exactly a quote from what is said twice about Samuel. "And the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favour with the Lord and with the people." So here we have a scene that's supposed to be, it is reminiscent of Eli, but with the hint that the temple which we're seeing here is a temple that's not long for this world. So, what do we have? And let's try and put ourselves in the position of Mary. Let's assume, as has long been held, that one of Luke's witnesses for this incident was in fact Mary, that Luke relied on her to tell him what had gone on. And we have here, his mother treasured all these things in her heart. In other words, something happened there that she didn't really understand, but which came clearer later. Which is why Luke has structured it so brilliantly, because of course they have the family coming up to the temple. Then the festival was ended. Just a little hint that it was the Passover and that it was going to be the last Passover. The Passover was going to end. And they started to return. The boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travellers, they went a day's journey. Remember, at the end of the Gospel, we will have people not knowing where Jesus was, and a group of people going away for a day or half a day's journey out of Jerusalem. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. Again, something which we happen at the end of the Gospel. Except that they don't have to search for him because he's already showed himself to them then. After 3 days, they found him in the temple. Of course, 3 days is the Greek translation for a Hebraism, meaning several days later. But it's the key memory that we're talking about the difference between the crucified and the risen Jesus. After 3 days they found him. In other words, this is a foretelling, a presage of the resurrection. And they found him sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions, which of course is what Jesus had in fact been doing shortly before his crucifixion. When he's sitting after his resurrection, he is risen on high and sitting in the presence of the Most High. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers, which is a theme that's going to be repeated throughout the Gospel. The people who hear him were amazed at his answers. Now, and here we have just a couple of little signs of how brilliant Luke is. It's when his parents saw him, they were astonished, it says. Well, the Greek is actually exeplagesan. And that's rather an odd word, because in fact it means to be appalled. It's much more to be appalled, astonished in the sense of being a bit horrified, as you might imagine actually parents would be. If you find your child busy lecturing the temple authorities, you would probably be pretty appalled. So, we tend to think of astonished in a positive sense, but actually this is not the immediate sense of that. Let's look at a curious place where that appears. That word appears because it seems to have something to do with our text. Okay, here's the book of Ecclesiastes. And I'll read you the little chunk, which it seems to me that Luke is playing with here. In my vain life I've seen everything. There are righteous people who perish in their righteousness, and there are wicked people who prolong their life in their evil doing. Do not be too righteous, and do not act too wise. Why should you, and our modern translation says, destroy yourself, but the actual word is be appalled. Why should you be appalled? Do not be too wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? So here we have the suggestion that Jesus is doing something before his time, and he's putting himself at great risk and danger. But that is in fact what is going to happen. Later on, he is going to come up before the temple authority. He's going to answer them, and he's going to be killed for it. So here we have a very well hidden little prophecy of what's going on. And guess what? Surprise, surprise, that continues with the next verse. They were astonished, and said they were appalled. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety," it says. Well, actually, yet again, not in great anxiety. It's a quote from a passage which we know very well from the prophet Zechariah, something which we usually get in Lent. "And I will pour out a spirit of compassion and supplication on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that when they look on the one whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child." So, literally, she's saying, it's the same verb as is here is translated as mourned. Been searching for you in great anxiety, been searching for you with mourning, as if we'd lost our only child. That's the verbal resonance that's captured here, as we've lost the firstborn. So, again, a prophecy of the fulfillment of Zechariah's prophecy. Here she comes up and she's so anxious that she mourns the firstborn. He said to them, "Why are you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" So that's referring both to the temple and, of course, to the trajectory of his life, in which he is going to open up the Father's house to us and sit in it. And that's the whole of his family life trajectory. So no wonder they don't really get it. But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. So, end of hijinks, end of this extraordinary little glimpse, this prophetic glimpse of what is to happen. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. In other words, over time, maybe she started to realize what it was that she had felt and how it fit in with other things, and how all of this was prophetic of something that was to come. And Joseph, who, like Samuel, was to replace the whole of the temple structure with Eli and the bad priest, his sons Phinehas and Hophni. All of that was due to be replaced. Jesus grew in wisdom, like the wisdom from the book of Ecclesiastes, where he wasn't going to die too soon, but at the right time, and in divine and human favour. So, how do we add to this for our celebration of this feast, the Feast of the Holy Family? I think it's a reminder that of all the difficult things that God does in order to bring us to life, he even comes into a family. That this is not necessarily a happy, a sweet, a kitsch, a perfect, a porcelain reality. It can be a difficult, a tense, a complicated reality full of all sorts of hidden things and unspoken things and tensions and dramas. And that yet it was in the midst of a family and dealing with all those things that God wanted to come into our midst so as to open up the possibility that we might become God's family. So let's rejoice with the Virgin at what she saw. Remember how little she understood about it. Rejoice to think that our family screw-ups, our family misadventures may also be blessed and have another meaning than the one we're currently able to give them. And that there may be a far, far happier and richer fulfillment of them than we can imagine. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.